Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Before we begin tonight, let me ask you something. What scares you more, what you can see in the dark or what you can't? Because up in Alaska, there's a time of year when that question stops being hypothetical. The sun goes down in November, and it doesn't come back up for 67 days. 2 months of straight darkness. No dawn, no light, just endless night. Now, most people hear that and think, that sounds rough. But there are some people, workers, locals, regular folks just trying to make a living, who know the real truth about those 67 days. And that truth? It's something the authorities don't want you to know. Tonight, I've got 7 stories. 7 people who experienced something during the polar night that changed them forever. Things that followed them, things that hunted them, things that made them question if they'd ever really be safe again. These stories were supposed to stay hidden, but they're coming out now. This is Mr. Midnight, and you're about to hear something you won't forget. Turn off your lights if you're brave enough. Let's begin. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been working as a night janitor for 12 years. I started cleaning office buildings when I first came to Alaska from Mexico. The pay was good, and I didn't mind working while everyone else slept. 3 years ago, I got a job at Anchorage General Hospital. It was the best job I'd ever had. Steady hours, good benefits, and the work wasn't too hard. I've cleaned every type of building you can think of. Fancy office towers, old warehouses, even a morgue once. Nothing ever scared me. I'm not the type to get spooked by empty hallways or strange noises. When you work alone at night, you learn to ignore your imagination. But what happened last winter at the hospital changed everything I thought I knew about the dark. I'm telling you this story because I need someone to understand what I went through. And if you ever work night shift anywhere in Alaska during the polar night, you need to know what's really out there waiting in the darkness. The thing about Alaska in winter is that the sun barely comes up. In December and January, we get maybe 4 hours of dim light each day. The rest of the time, it's just black. And when the darkness lasts that long, things start to happen. Things that shouldn't be possible. ***, Section 2. Professional context and setup. ***, Anchorage General Hospital is a big place, 7 floors with over 200 rooms. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. I worked alone except for the security guard who sat at the front desk. The hospital runs 24 hours, but at night it gets real quiet. Just the sound of machines beeping and the hum of the heating system. I had my routine down perfect. Start on the 7th floor and work my way down. Each floor took about an hour if I moved fast. I had my cart with all my supplies, mop, bucket, disinfectant, trash bags, and my radio to call security if I needed help. The hospital gave us good equipment. Industrial floor cleaner that could handle anything. I knew every corner of that building. Which rooms were always messy, which hallways got the most foot traffic, where people liked to eat snacks and leave crumbs. Room 237 was on the 2nd floor, in the old wing that didn't get much use anymore. It was supposed to be empty most of the time, just used for storage. That winter was bad, even for Alaska. The polar nights started early and seemed like it would never end. By December, we hadn't seen real sunlight in weeks. People get weird when it's dark all the time. The emergency room saw more fights, more accidents, more people just losing their minds. I remember the exact night it started, December 15th. There was a blizzard outside, and the hospital was running on backup power in some sections. I was working alone because my partner called in sick. Nothing unusual about that. I'd worked alone plenty of times before. When I got to room 237 that night, something was different. The door was closed, which was normal, but there was a smell coming from underneath it. Not like hospital smells, antiseptic, or medicine. This smelled like the ocean, salty and rotten, like seaweed left on a beach for too long. ***, Section 3. First anomaly, ***, I opened the door to room 237 and turned on my flashlight. The overhead lights in that wing were acting up because of the power issues. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. The walls had black stains on them, not like normal stains from spilled coffee or marker ink. These stains looked wet and seemed to move in my flashlight beam. They covered about half the wall next to the window, spreading out like fingers reaching across the white paint. I thought maybe a pipe had burst somewhere and dirty water was leaking through the walls. That happens sometimes in old buildings. I touched one of the stains with my glove, and it felt cold and slimy. The smell got stronger. That rotting seaweed smell that made my stomach turn. I radioed Dave, the security guard, to ask if he knew about any water damage in room 237. He said the room had been empty for months and he hadn't heard about any maintenance issues. He told me to just clean it up and write a report for the morning shift. So I got to work. I scrubbed those stains with everything I had: bleach, industrial cleaner, even tried scraping them with my putty knife. Nothing worked. The stains just seemed to soak deeper into the wall. After an hour of trying, I gave up and moved on to the next room. The next night, I went back to check on room 237. The stains were back, and they were bigger. They covered almost the entire wall now, and there were new ones starting on the opposite wall. The smell was so strong I had to breathe through my mouth. That's when I heard the voices. They were coming from inside the room, even though I could see it was empty. Quiet voices speaking in a language I recognized but couldn't understand. My grandmother used to speak Russian when she told me old stories from her childhood. These voices sounded like that. Russian words spoken very softly, like people having a conversation in the next room. I called out, "Hello? Is someone in here?" The voices stopped immediately. I searched every corner of the room with my flashlight, but there was nobody there. Just me, my cleaning cart, and those awful black stains spreading across the walls. *** Section 4. Escalation. ***. Over the next week, room 237 became my biggest problem. Every night, the stains got worse. They started appearing on the ceiling and floor too. The smell got so bad that I had to wear a mask just to go in there, and the voices got louder. I could make out some words now. My grandmother had taught me a little Russian when I was small. They were saying things like hungry and cold and so tired. Sometimes I heard what sounded like crying or moaning. The hospital staff started to notice the smell. Dr. Martinez asked me about it when I was mopping the hallway. I told him about the stains and asked if they knew what was causing them. He looked at me funny and said room 237 had been empty for over 6 months. No patients, no staff, nothing stored in there. But I knew someone was in that room. Every night around 2 a.m., I could see light under the door. Not electric light, something dimmer, like candlelight. And I started hearing footsteps in there. Slow, shuffling footsteps like someone walking back and forth. One night, I worked up the courage to look through the keyhole. What I saw made my hands shake so bad I dropped my flashlight. There were people in that room, 3 or 4 figures wearing old-fashioned clothes, long coats and boots that looked like they were from 100 years ago. But their faces were wrong. Gray skin, sunken eyes, and when they opened their mouths, black water poured out. They were walking around the room, touching the walls where the stains were worst. And they were talking in Russian, planning something. I couldn't understand everything, but I heard them say hospital and feast and winter night. I ran. I left my cart in the hallway and ran straight to the security desk. I told Dave what I saw, but he just looked at me like I was crazy. He said stress could make people see things that weren't there. He suggested I take a few days off. But I couldn't stop thinking about those figures. And I started noticing other things around the hospital. *** Section 5. Revelation and Climax ***. I went to the hospital records office during my break and asked to see the building plans. I told them I needed to know about the plumbing in the old wing. What I found explained everything. Room 237 was built over an old cemetery. The papers showed that in 1847 there was a Russian settlement here. 200 people died during a terrible winter that lasted 8 months. The record said they died from cold and hunger, but there were notes in the margins written in pencil. Someone had written cannibalism and madness and cursed ground. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. She used to tell me about the hungry dark, spirits that made deals with darkness itself to survive impossible winters. They traded their humanity for life, but the life they got wasn't really living. They became something else, something that needed to feed on the living to stay in our world. That night, I saw them outside room 237 for the first time. I was mopping the hallway when I heard wet footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw one of the gray figures walking toward the intensive care unit. It left dark, wet footprints that smelled like ocean water, even though we were 50 miles from the coast. I followed it, staying far back. It went into room 215, where Mrs. Chen was dying from cancer. I watched through the window as the figure leaned over her bed and put its mouth near her face. Mrs. Chen died 20 minutes later. That's when I understood. These spirits were feeding on people who were close to death. They were stealing breath and life to keep themselves from fading away completely. And the polar night made them stronger. Every night after that, I saw more of them. 5, then 7, then 10 gray figures walking the hospital halls. They went to different rooms each night, always finding the patients who were weakest. The death rate at the hospital doubled that month, but the doctors just blamed it on winter depression and seasonal illness. The black stains started appearing in other rooms too. Wherever the spirits went, those wet, rotting stains followed. And I started getting sick. First, my hands and feet felt cold all the time, even in the heated hospital. Then, I noticed frostbite marks on my fingers, even though I was never outside without gloves. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw that my skin was getting gray and my eyes were sinking back into my head. The spirits had noticed me, watching them. They were draining my life as the punishment for interfering. Every night, I felt weaker and more tired. I tried to call in sick, but every time I left the hospital, I would black out. I'd wake up back in room 237 with no memory of how I got there. I found out why when I discovered the supply closet on the 3rd floor that I'd never noticed before. Inside was a skeleton wearing a janitor's uniform. The name tag said, Susan Walsh, Night Custodian. The bones were covered in the same black stains that appeared on the walls. Susan had been my predecessor. The spirits had trapped her just like they were trapping me. We were their guardians, forced to watch them feed and clean up the evidence they left behind. But the worst part was what I overheard them planning. On December 21st, the longest night of the year, they wanted to spread beyond the hospital. They planned to claim the entire city, going house to house, feeding on everyone until Anchorage became a city of the hungry dead. I couldn't let that happen. Asterisk, Section 6, Resolution and Aftermath. Asterisk. I remembered something my grandmother taught me when I was little. She said, fire was the enemy of the hungry dark. Not regular fire, but fire made with purpose and sacrifice. On December 20th, I brought extra cleaning supplies to work. Industrial disinfectant, floor wax, anything that would burn hot and fast. I waited until 3 a.m. when the spirits were at their strongest. Then I went to room 237. All of them were there. Maybe 15 gray figures now, standing in a circle, speaking Russian words that hurt my ears to hear. The black stains covered every surface in the room, and the smell was so bad I could taste it. I poured the cleaning chemicals all over the floor and walls. The spirits turned to look at me with their hollow eyes. They started moving toward me, but I was ready. I lit a match and dropped it. The flames were black instead of orange, and they spread faster than any fire I'd ever seen. The spirits screamed, in voices that shattered the window and set off car alarms in the parking lot. The black stains bubbled and steamed like they were alive. I got burned badly, second-degree burns on my arms and face, but room 237 was destroyed completely. The fire department said it was the strangest thing they'd ever seen. The room burned so hot it cracked the foundation, but the fire didn't spread to any other part of the hospital. When the smoke cleared, they found bones in the basement. Hundreds of them, from the old Russian cemetery that was supposed to be long gone. The city had to bring in specialists to remove them properly. I spent 2 weeks in the burn unit. When I got out, I quit my job at the hospital. I couldn't go back there, not after what I'd seen. My supervisor understood. Before, she said, I'd been through enough, but the experience changed me in ways that can't be fixed. My hair turned white overnight from the shock, and sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, I catch myself speaking Russian words I shouldn't know. I moved to Mexico last year, where the sun shines every day, and there's no winter darkness. But every December, when the nights get long, I feel them calling me back. The hungry dark remembers me, and it wants me to return. I know that someday, probably during another polar night, I'll have to go back to Alaska. Not because I want to, but because someone needs to watch for signs that the spirits are returning. The cemetery is gone, and room 237 is destroyed, but hungry things like that don't die easily. If you ever work night shift in a hospital, especially during the dark months, pay attention to rooms that smell like the ocean. Listen for voices speaking languages you shouldn't understand. And if you see black stains that move when you're not looking directly at them, don't try to clean them. Run. And whatever you do, don't let them see that you've noticed them watching. Because once the hungry dark knows you can see them, you become part of their world. And in their world, the only choice is to feed or be fed upon. I still wake up some nights feeling cold, even here in the warmth of Mexico, and sometimes I swear I can smell rotting seaweed on the wind. Section 1. Narrator Introduction. My name is Sandra Martinez, and I've been driving for Uber in Anchorage, Alaska for 3 years now. I started doing this after my ex-husband left me with a mountain of medical bills for my daughter Emma's surgery. She was born with a heart problem, and even with insurance, we owed more money than I could make at my old job at the grocery store. Driving nights pays better than days, especially during what we call polar night, those dark winter months when the sun barely shows up. The surge pricing kicks in hard when it's cold and dark, and drunk people need rides home from bars. I figured I could handle whatever came my way. I dealt with drunk college kids, crying breakup passengers, and even had a guy throw up in my back seat once. I thought I knew what the worst parts of this job were. I was wrong. What happened last December during the darkest week of polar night changed everything I thought I knew about my city and the people living in it. I'm telling this story because other drivers need to know what's really out there picking up rides. And maybe if enough of us speak up, someone will finally listen. Section 2. Professional context and setup. Let me tell you how Uber driving works in Anchorage during winter. The app is everything. It tells you where to go, who to pick up, and how much you'll make. My car is a 2018 Honda Civic with good winter tires and a phone mount on my dashboard. I keep hand warmers, water bottles, and a first aid kit in my glove box. The heat runs constantly because it gets down to negative 20 degrees some nights. During polar night, I start driving around 4 p.m. when it's already dark, and I don't stop until 2 a.m. The money is good. Sometimes I make $300 in one night just from surge pricing, but it's lonely work. Most of my passengers are headed to or from downtown bars, the hospital, or the airport. December 15th was a Tuesday night, colder than usual, even for Alaska. The weather app on my phone showed negative 15 degrees, and there was fresh snow on the roads. I'd been driving for about 2 hours, mostly picking up people from Sullivan Arena after a hockey game. Easy rides, good tips, everyone in a happy mood. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a new ride request. The pickup location showed the Anchorage Museum, which seemed odd because the museum closes at 6 p.m. But sometimes people get dropped off there and walk to nearby restaurants, so I didn't think much about it. The passenger's name was listed as David K. with a 4.8-star rating. Seemed normal enough. I drove through downtown, past the closed shops and restaurants. The museum parking lot was empty, except for one figure standing under a streetlight near the main entrance. He was tall and thin, wearing a long black coat that looked expensive. As I pulled up, he walked over and got into my back seat without saying anything at first. "Good evening," he said in a voice that had some kind of accent I couldn't place. "Thank you for coming so quickly." I looked at him in my rearview mirror. He had pale skin and dark hair, probably in his 40s. Nothing unusual, except his eyes seemed very dark, almost black. But the lighting wasn't great, so I figured that was just shadows. "Where are we headed tonight?" I asked, starting the meter on my app. "The old neighborhood," he said. "I'll give you directions as we go." This was my first red flag. Most passengers either put their destination in the app or tell me a specific address. But some older folks aren't great with technology, so I decided to roll with it. Section 3. First anomaly. "Just head toward downtown," the man said. "I'll tell you where to turn." I started driving south on C Street. The roads were mostly empty, just a few other cars and some late buses. In my mirror, I noticed the passenger kept looking at the back of my neck instead of out the window. Every time I glanced back, his eyes were focused on me, not the scenery. "Cold night tonight," I said, trying to make conversation. Most passengers either want to chat or they want silence. I was testing which type he was. "Yes," he said slowly. "But you seem very warm." "That's good." Something about the way he said warm made me uncomfortable. It wasn't flirty or weird in a normal way. It was like he was talking about the temperature of meat at a butcher shop. "Turn left here," he said when we reached 6th Avenue. I turned, and he had me turn again on G Street, then again on 4th Avenue. We were driving in a pattern that didn't make sense, like he was having me circle around the same few blocks. The area was getting darker too. Some of the streetlights were burned out, and most of the buildings looked empty. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked. "This neighborhood looks pretty deserted." "Oh yes," he said. "Very few people live here now. That's what makes it perfect." "Perfect for what?" I wanted to ask, but something told me I didn't want to know the answer. My phone, which was mounted on my dashboard, started acting strange. The GPS map kept glitching, showing our location jumping around to different streets. The Uber app froze for a few seconds, then came back online. I'd never had technical problems like this before. "Keep going straight," the passenger said. "Almost there." We were now in a part of downtown I barely recognized. The buildings looked older and run down. Half the streetlights were out, and I didn't see any other cars or people around. According to my GPS, we were near the Ship Creek area, but nothing looked familiar. That's when I noticed the passenger wasn't wearing a seatbelt. When people get in my car, I always check the mirror to make sure they buckle up. It's for insurance reasons. But this guy was just sitting there, not moving much, staring at the back of my head. "Sir, I need you to put on your seatbelt," I said. He didn't respond right away. When I looked in the mirror again, he was smiling. His teeth looked very white in the dim light from my dashboard. "Turn right here," he said, ignoring my request about the seatbelt. I turned onto a street that looked like it was scheduled for demolition. Several buildings had broken windows, and there were construction barriers blocking some of the sidewalks. No cars were parked anywhere, and all the buildings looked empty. My phone started glitching again. The screen flickered, and the GPS completely disappeared for about 10 seconds. When it came back, it showed us in a completely different part of town, which couldn't be right. "Stop here," the passenger said. We were in front of an old apartment building that looked abandoned. All the windows were dark, and there was plywood covering some of them. The front door had a chain and padlock on it. "This is it?" I asked. "Are you sure? This building looks empty." "Oh, it's not empty," he said. "There are many of us living here." Something in his voice made my skin crawl. I kept the car running and my foot near the gas pedal. Section 4, Escalation and Confrontation. "That'll be $12.50, I said, hoping he would just pay and get out. But instead of reaching for his wallet, the passenger leaned forward. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, and it was cold. Not cool like normal breath in winter, but actually cold, like air from a freezer. "You know what I find interesting about you, Sandra?" he said. I froze. I had never told him my name. It's not displayed anywhere in my car, and passengers only see my first name on the app after they get in. "How do you know my name?" I asked. "Oh, we know all about you," he said. "Single mother, working nights to pay for your daughter's medical bills. Very dedicated. Very warm-blooded." I reached for my phone to end the ride, but the screen was completely black. The phone wasn't responding to any of my touches. Even the power button wouldn't work. "Don't worry about the app," the passenger said. "Technology doesn't work well around us." I turned around to look at him directly, and what I saw made my blood freeze. His eyes weren't just dark, they were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just black holes where eyes should be. And when he smiled, I could see that his teeth were pointed like needles, with 2 longer fangs in front. "What are you?" I whispered. "Hungry," he said. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and my car shot forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw the thing that looked like a man get out of my car and stand in the middle of the street. But he didn't move like a person. He just appeared standing there, like he had teleported out of my back seat. I drove as fast as I could back toward the main roads, running red lights and stop signs. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely steer. When I got to a well-lit gas station, I pulled over and tried to call 911, but my phone was still dead. The gas station attendant let me use their phone. When the police arrived, I told them everything. They drove back to the area where I dropped off the passenger, but they said all the buildings there were scheduled for demolition and had been empty for months. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. When I got home, I tried to check my Uber account to report what happened, but according to the app, I had never picked up a passenger named David K. There was no record of any ride to that part of downtown. As far as Uber was concerned, that trip never happened. I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the stress of working so many night shifts was getting to me. But then I looked at my steering wheel and saw 2 small holes in the plastic, like something had bitten it with fangs. Section 5, Revelation and Final Confrontation. I couldn't sleep for 3 days after that. I kept researching online, trying to find an explanation for what happened. That's when I discovered information about Kushtaka, shapeshifters from Alaska native folklore that feed on human warmth and blood during the darkest parts of winter. According to the stories, they can look like people, but their true forms are more like animals. They hunt during polar night when it's dark for weeks at a time. And they're smart. They adapt to modern life and use technology to find victims. I started paying attention to my passengers differently. Over the next week, I noticed things I had missed before. Some passengers never seemed to breathe fog in the cold. Others stared at my neck the whole ride. A few asked to be dropped off in areas with no houses or businesses. I found an online forum for rideshare drivers who had strange experiences. Turns out I wasn't crazy. Drivers in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and other northern cities had been reporting similar passengers for years. Passengers who disappeared from ride records, passengers with black eyes and cold breath, passengers who asked to go to abandoned places. One driver named Mike posted about finding bite marks on his steering wheel. Another driver named Lisa said she picked up 3 passengers who all looked identical and spoke in unison. A driver named Carlos shared photos of his back seat after a strange passenger got out. The leather was covered in frost, even though his heater had been running. We started sharing tips for identifying these things. They always paid in cash if they paid at all. They never used real names in their profiles. They couldn't be photographed clearly. Pictures always came out blurry or corrupted, and they seemed to have trouble with bright lights and electronic devices. Some of us started carrying military-grade flashlights and police scanners. The bright LED lights seemed to make them uncomfortable, and the radio chatter from emergency services kept our location tracking working. But the creatures were getting smarter too. They started using normal-sounding names and creating detailed fake profiles. Some even figured out how to avoid affecting our phones and GPS systems, at least for short periods. 3 weeks after my first encounter, I picked up what looked like a normal businessman from the airport. Professional suit, leather briefcase, polite conversation. But 20 minutes into the ride, I watched in my rearview mirror as his skin turned gray and scaled. His fingers stretched into claws, and his eyes went completely black. I tried to speed toward the nearest police station, but he grabbed my headrest and the car filled with freezing air. I could see my breath, and my windows started frosting over from the inside. I crashed into a snowbank trying to get away from him. The thing chased me on foot, but I made it to a 24-hour diner before it caught me. Under the bright fluorescent lights, it stopped following. I stayed there until sunrise, and the waitress said she watched something that looked like a large dog or wolf run away when the sun came up. Section 6, Resolution and Aftermath. That was my last night driving for Uber. I reported everything to the police again, and this time I had other drivers backing up my story. We had photos of bite marks, recordings of strange voices, and documentation of rides that disappeared from our apps. The authorities didn't officially believe us, but they started looking into the pattern of missing drivers during polar night seasons. Turned out we weren't the first to notice. Taxi drivers had been disappearing in Anchorage for decades, always during the darkest winter months. They found some of the missing drivers in abandoned buildings around the city. All of them had been drained of blood, but the police reports classified the deaths as exposure to cold weather. No one wanted to write vampire or shapeshifter in an official report. I quit driving and started working at a call center during day shifts. The pay is less, but I can sleep at night now. I still carry a bright flashlight everywhere I go, and I don't drive after dark between November and February. Emma's medical bills are still a problem, but we're managing. Some of the other drivers and I started a support group for people who've had supernatural encounters. We meet once a week at that same 24-hour diner, always under bright lights. If you're thinking about driving rideshare in Alaska, especially during polar night, please be careful. Screen your passengers, trust your instincts, carry bright lights, and keep your phone charged. And if a passenger asks to go somewhere abandoned or keeps staring at your neck, end the ride immediately. These things are still out there, and they're always hungry. But they're not unstoppable. They just count on people not believing in them. The more of us who speak up, the harder it gets for them to hunt. Stay safe out there, and remember, some passengers are more dangerous than others. Section 1. Narrator Introduction. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been delivering pizza for Mario's Pizza Palace in Fairbanks, Alaska for 3 years. I started this job when I was 19, right after high school. The pay wasn't great, but the tips were decent, and I was saving every dollar for college. Most people think being a pizza delivery driver is easy work, but in Fairbanks during winter, it's a whole different game. In case you don't know, Fairbanks gets something called polar night. For about 2 months every winter, the sun barely comes up. We're talking 20 hours of darkness every day. The temperature drops to 40 below zero. Your car might not start. The roads turn into ice rinks. Most delivery drivers quit during polar night, but I actually liked it. The roads were empty, the city was quiet, and people tipped extra because they felt sorry for anyone crazy enough to drive around in that cold darkness. I've delivered pizza to some weird places over the years. Rich people's mansions where the driveway was longer than most streets. Apartment buildings where the hallways smelled like cat pee and cigarettes. Once I delivered to a guy who answered the door in his underwear at 2 a.m. But what happened during the polar night of 2019 inches, an old neighborhood on the south side of town, changed everything I thought I knew about this job. I learned that some customers aren't really customers at all, and some addresses shouldn't exist on any map. Section 2. Professional context and setup. Mario's Pizza Palace sits on 2nd Avenue, right in the heart of downtown Fairbanks. It's not much to look at, just a small building with red brick walls and a neon sign that flickers when it gets too cold. Inside, we have 4 ovens, a prep station, and a computer system for taking orders that crashes at least twice a week. The whole place smells like cheese and pepperoni, which sounds good until you've worked there for 3 years. The delivery car was a 1998 Honda Civic that I bought for $800. It wasn't pretty, but it had good tires and a heater that worked most of the time. I kept an emergency kit in the trunk, blankets, flares, energy bars, and a small shovel. In Fairbanks, getting stuck in the snow can kill you, especially during polar night. Our delivery area covered most of Fairbanks, from the university in the north to the rough neighborhoods down south. I knew every street, every shortcut, every house where the porch light was burned out. After 3 years, I could drive to any address in town with my eyes closed. The night shift was my favorite. It started at 5 in the evening and went until 2 in the morning. Most nights, especially during polar night, it was just me and Tony, the manager. Tony was a good guy in his 50s who'd been running pizza places his whole life. He trusted me to handle the weird late-night deliveries without backup. December 15th, 2019 was a typical polar night evening. The temperature was 38 below zero. Snow was falling steady, and the wind was howling like a hurt animal. Most people were smart enough to stay inside, but that just meant bigger tips for the few deliveries we got. I was restocking the insulated delivery bags when our computer beeped with a new order: large pepperoni pizza. Address: 1847 Yukon Street. Total: $18.50. The customer paid online with a credit card, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the address. I'd been delivering pizza in Fairbanks for 3 years, and I thought I knew every street in our delivery zone, but I'd never heard of Yukon Street. I checked our map on the wall. No Yukon Street. I looked it up on my phone. Nothing. "Hey, Tony," I called to the back office. "You know where Yukon Street is?" Tony looked up from his paperwork. "Yukon Street? Never heard of it. You sure that's what the order says?" I double-checked the computer screen. 1847 Yukon Street. Customer name. That's weird. It just says D. Volkov. "Must be a new street or something," Tony said. "GPS will find it. Take the order." I loaded the pizza into my delivery bag, grabbed my keys, and headed out into the cold darkness. My Honda started on the 3rd try, which was pretty good for 38 below. I typed the address into my phone's GPS and waited. "Calculating route," the GPS said in its robot voice. After a few seconds, it found something. Destination located. Drive time 12 minutes. The GPS directed me south, past the neighborhoods I knew, into an area where the streetlights were farther apart and most of the houses looked old and run down. The roads weren't plowed as well out here. My car slipped and slid through the snow, but I kept going. Section 3, First Anomaly. After about 10 minutes of driving through streets I'd never seen before, my GPS announced, "In 500 feet, turn right onto Yukon Street." I slowed down and looked for a street sign. There it was, a small green sign that said Yukon Street. The street looked like it hadn't been plowed in weeks. My car's headlights cut through the blowing snow, showing me a narrow road with tall pine trees on both sides. I turned right and drove slowly, looking for house numbers. The first house I passed was 1,820, then 1,830. The houses were small and old, most of them dark. This part of town felt different somehow. Quieter, like the snow muffled more than just sound. Finally, my headlights picked up a mailbox with 1,847 painted on it in faded black numbers. I pulled into the driveway and looked at the house. It was tiny, more like a cabin than a house. The wood siding was dark with age, and the roof was covered in at least 2 feet of snow. But what struck me most was how old it looked. Like really old. Like it had been built 100 years ago, and nobody had bothered to update it since. There were no electric lights in the windows. Instead, I could see the warm yellow, a glow of candles or oil lamps flickering inside. Smoke was coming from a stone chimney. The whole place looked like something out of an old Western movie. I parked and grabbed the pizza. The wind was so cold it hurt my face, even with my hood up. I walked to the front door and knocked. Heavy footsteps inside. The door opened, and I found myself looking at a man who seemed to be in his 70s. He was short and stocky, with a long gray beard and deep-set eyes. He wore a thick fur coat that looked like it was made from wolf or bear skin. When he spoke, his accent was so thick I could barely understand him. "Ah, good, food is here," he said in what sounded like a Russian accent. "How much?" "1850, I said, holding up the pizza bag. The old man reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and took out 3 gold coins. Real gold coins, not the chocolate kind. They were heavy and cold in my hand. "This should cover it, yes?" he said with a smile that showed several missing teeth. I stared at the coins. They looked old. Really old. Each one had writing in a language I couldn't read, and the face of some guy with a beard and a crown. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't accept these," I said. "I need cash or a credit card." The old man looked confused. "But this is good money, pure gold." "I know, but my boss won't accept gold coins. Do you have any regular money?" The man disappeared back into the house. I could hear him talking to someone in that same language. Russian, maybe. After a minute, he came back with a $20 bill that looked like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. "Here," he said. "Keep change." I gave him the pizza and headed back to my car. As I was walking away, I glanced back at the cabin. Through one of the windows, I could see several men sitting around a wooden table. They all had the same thick fur coats and long beards. They were all looking at the pizza box like they'd never seen one before. I drove back to Mario's thinking about those gold coins and that weird old cabin. When I got back, Tony was waiting with another order. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "Just a weird old guy who tried to pay me with gold coins." Tony laughed. "Probably some collector or something. Rich people have weird hobbies." Section 4. Escalation. The next night, December 16th, I was working again. Around 9 o'clock, our computer beeped with another order. Large pepperoni pizza. 1847 Yukon Street. Same address. "That's weird," I said to Tony. "Same guy as last night." "Maybe he really liked the pizza," Tony said. "Go make another delivery." I loaded up the pizza and drove back to Yukon Street. The road was even more snowed in than the night before, but my car made it through. I pulled into the same driveway and walked to the front door. This time, a different man answered. He looked about the same age as the first guy, with the same thick beard and fur coat. But this wasn't the same person. This man was taller and had different colored eyes. "Pizza," he said in the same thick Russian accent. How much? 1850, I said. Just like the night before, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He handed me 3 gold coins that looked exactly like the ones from the night before. Sir, I told the other guy last night that I can't accept gold coins, I said. The man looked confused. Other guy? What other guy? The man who ordered pizza last night. He looked a lot like you. The man shook his head. No other guy, just me. I live alone. That was definitely a lie. I could see through the window behind him, and there were at least 5 or 6 men sitting around the same wooden table. They all had the same beards and fur coats. The man went back inside and returned with another old $20 bill. I gave him the pizza and left, but this time I was really confused. 2 different men, both claiming to live alone, both trying to pay with identical gold coins from the same kind of leather pouch. On the drive back to Mario's, I started paying more attention to the cabin. There were no power lines going to it. No telephone wires. No electric meter on the outside wall. In Fairbanks, in December, with temperatures below 0, how were these guys staying warm without electricity? And that smell? As I was walking back to my car, I'd noticed a smell coming from the cabin. It was like meat that had been hanging in a smokehouse for too long. Old meat. Preserved meat. The third night, December 17th, same thing happened. Another order to 1847 Yukon Street. Another old Russian guy with a beard and fur coat trying to pay with gold coins. This one was shorter than the other 2, with a scar across his left cheek. By now, I was really curious. When I got home after work, I stayed up until dawn researching. I looked up 1847 Yukon Street in every database I could find. Property records, tax records, old city maps. What I found made my blood go cold. According to the Fairbanks city records, there was no 1847 Yukon Street. Yukon Street itself didn't exist on any official map made after 1920. But in the historical archives at the University of Alaska, I found something that made me sick to my stomach. Section 5. Supernatural Revelation. In 1847, there was a small Russian trading post at what would eventually become 1847 Yukon Street. It was run by 7 Russian fur traders who had come to Alaska to hunt and trade with the local native tribes. Their names were Dmitry Volkov, Pavel Petrov, Ivan Kozlov, Mikhail Romanov, Alexei Fedorov, Boris Morozov, and Sergei Ivanov. The winter of 1847 was one of the worst in Alaska's recorded history. It started snowing in October and didn't stop until May. The temperature dropped to 60 below 0 and stayed there for months. The 7 Russian traders got trapped in their small cabin with no way to get supplies and no way to communicate with the outside world. According to the report I found, a search party discovered the cabin in June of 1848. 6 of the 7 Russians were dead. Their bodies showed signs that they had been butchered and eaten. The only survivor was Dmitry Volkov, and he was completely insane. Volkov told the search party that his companions were still alive. He insisted they were all living together in the cabin, hunting and trading just like always. He talked about them like they were sitting right there at the table with him, even though their bones were scattered around the cabin floor. The authorities took Volkov to an asylum in Anchorage, where he died 3 months later. But for decades after that, people reported seeing lights in the old cabin during the winter months. The local native tribes said the place was cursed and warned people to stay away. Eventually, the city of Fairbanks grew around the area, and the old trading post was forgotten. But according to these records, the cabin had never been torn down. It was still there, just hidden in the woods where nobody bothered to look. I realized I had been delivering pizza to dead men. 7 Russian traders who had been dead for over 170 years, but somehow didn't know it. They were still living in their cabin, still thinking it was 1847, still waiting for spring to come so they could get back to their hunting and trading. But that raised another question. If they were dead, how were they ordering pizza? How were they paying with gold coins? And why could I see them when, according to everything I'd read, most people couldn't? I decided I needed to investigate. The next time I got an order for 1847 Yukon Street, I was going to do more than just deliver pizza and leave. That's Section 6, Full Encounter, December 18th. 4th night in a row. The order came in around 10 o'clock. Large pepperoni pizza, 1847 Yukon Street. This time, I was ready. I loaded the pizza into my car and drove to Yukon Street, but instead of parking in the driveway, I parked about 50 yards away behind a cluster of pine trees. I could still see the cabin, but they couldn't see my car. I walked through the snow toward the cabin, staying in the shadows. The windows were glowing with that same warm yellow light. I crept up to the side of the building and looked through one of the windows. What I saw made me understand just how much trouble I was in. 7 men were sitting around a wooden table. All of them had thick beards and were wearing identical fur coats. They were eating pizza, not just the pizza I'd delivered over the past few nights, but multiple pizza boxes stacked on the table. The boxes had Mario's Pizza Palace logos on them, but they looked old and stained. The men were talking and laughing, having normal conversations in Russian. But as I watched, I saw something that made me want to vomit. One of the men casually reached over and cut a slice of meat from another man's forearm with a hunting knife. The victim didn't react at all. He just kept eating his pizza and talking like nothing had happened. The man who cut the meat added it to his pizza like it was pepperoni. Then I noticed the smell. That preserved meat smell I'd been noticing. It wasn't coming from a smokehouse. It was coming from the men themselves. They were all in various states of decay, but they didn't seem to know it. I pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. The camera wouldn't focus properly in the dim light. I managed to get one blurry shot before I heard footsteps behind me. "You are early tonight," said a voice with a thick Russian accent. I spun around. One of the men from inside the cabin was standing behind me in the snow. He was tall and thin, with a beard that reached his chest. His eyes were completely black. "We have been expecting you," he said. "Come inside. It's too cold to wait out here." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The man put his hand on my shoulder, and his touch was so cold it burned through my jacket. "Come," he said again. "We have been waiting long time for Spring Trader to arrive." He guided me toward the front door of the cabin. I didn't have a choice. My body was moving, but it didn't feel like I was controlling it anymore. Inside the cabin, the other 6 men looked up from their meal and smiled at me with rotting teeth. "Welcome, friend," said the man who had answered the door on the first night. "You are just in time for dinner. Sit, sit." The cabin was decorated for Christmas, but it was Christmas from 1847. Hand-carved wooden ornaments hung from pine branches. Candles provided the only light. Everything looked exactly like it would have looked 170 years ago. "We are so happy to have visitor," said another man. "Has been quiet winter. Very few traders come through." "Sit down," said the tall man who had brought me inside. "Try the meat. It's very fresh." He pointed to a large platter in the center of the table. It was full of what looked like strips of jerky, but I could tell it wasn't from any animal. It was human meat. Recent human meat. Where did this come from?" "Where did this come from?" I asked. "From deer we caught yesterday," said one of the men. "Very fat deer, will last us many days." He gestured toward the corner of the cabin. Hanging from hooks on the wall were pieces of clothing, a delivery uniform, a pizza delivery bag, a name tag that said Steve. I realized they weren't talking about a deer. They were talking about another delivery driver. Someone who had made the same mistake I was making right now. I need to go," I said, standing up. "I have more deliveries to make." The men all laughed. "More deliveries?" said the first man. "But winter is just starting. You cannot leave during winter. It's impossible." We've been waiting for spring for just few months now," said another. "Will be soon. Then we can all travel together." They had no idea that 170 years had passed. In their minds, they had been trapped in this cabin for just a few months, waiting for the spring of 1848 to arrive. "Look, I know this is going to sound crazy," I said, "but it's not 1847 anymore. It's 2019. You've been dead for over 100 years." The men all stared at me for a moment, then they burst out laughing. "Dead?" said one of them. "Do we look dead to you?" Actually, yes, they looked very dead, but they couldn't see it. "You must be very tired from long journey," said the tall man. "Eat something. You will feel better." He cut another slice of meat from the man sitting next to him and held it out to me on the tip of his knife. I knew I had to get out of there right now, or I was going to end up hanging on those hooks with Steve's clothes. Section 7. Escape and Aftermath. I pretended to take the meat, but instead I grabbed the hunting knife and slashed at the tall man's wrist. He screamed and fell backward. The other men jumped up from the table, confused and angry. "He attacks us," one of them yelled. "Why does Trader attack us?" I ran for the door, but 2 of the men got there first. I was trapped. "You cannot leave during winter," said the first man. "Is suicide. You stay here until spring." I looked around the cabin for another way out. There was a small window on the back wall. I ran toward it, pushing past the rotting Russians. One of them grabbed my jacket, but the fabric tore and I broke free. I dove through the window, landing hard in the snow outside. The 7 men came pouring out of the cabin after me, all of them yelling in Russian. But they moved slowly, like their bodies didn't work quite right anymore. I ran through the deep snow toward my car, but when I got there, something was wrong. My Honda was covered in snow like it had been sitting there for months. The windows were completely iced over. When I tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. The Russians were getting closer, moving through the snow like zombies. I could hear them calling to me. "Come back, traitor. It's dangerous in winter. You will freeze." I managed to get the car started on the 4th try. I threw it in reverse and backed out of the trees, spinning my tires in the snow. The Russians were running toward me now, but they couldn't move fast enough. I floored the gas pedal and drove away from that cursed cabin as fast as I could. But when I turned on my car radio to calm my nerves, I nearly crashed into a tree. The radio was playing news from December 1847. A reporter was talking about territorial disputes in Alaska and the California gold rush. The weather forecast was for 6 more months of winter. I was being pulled into their time loop. Their reality was becoming my reality. I drove straight to the Fairbanks police station and told them everything. The desk sergeant listened to my story and then called for a welfare check at 1847 Yukon Street. 2 officers drove out there and came back an hour later. "There's no house at that address," one of them told me. "Just empty woods, has been for decades." "But I was just there," I said. "There's a cabin. There are 7 dead Russians living in it." The officers exchanged looks. They thought I was either drunk or crazy. I quit my job at Mario's Pizza Palace the next day. I moved out of Fairbanks a week later and went to live with my uncle in Seattle. I enrolled in community college and tried to forget about everything that had happened. But every winter, when the days get short and the air gets cold, my phone rings. The caller ID always shows the same number, the number for Mario's Pizza Palace. When I answer, I hear the same voice ordering the same thing. "Large pepperoni pizza, 1847 Yukon Street. Hurry please, we are very hungry." I've changed my phone number 4 times. It doesn't matter. They always find me. Last winter, the calls started coming every night. I know what that means. Dmitry Volkov and his 6 companions are getting impatient. They've been waiting for their spring trader for over 170 years, and they think I'm him. I've been avoiding Alaska for 3 years now, but I know I can't avoid it forever. Every winter, their pull gets stronger. Their hunger gets deeper. Eventually, during the longest polar night, when the darkness is complete and the cold is unbearable, I'm going to have to answer that call. And when I do, I'll finally understand what happened to Steve and all the other delivery drivers who thought they were just bringing pizza to a harmless old man in a cabin. But until then, I want to warn anyone who works in food delivery, especially in Alaska. If you ever get an order for an address that doesn't exist on any map, if you ever meet customers who try to pay with gold coins, if you ever smell preserved meat coming from a house with no electricity, don't investigate. Don't get curious. Just drive away. Drive away as fast as you can. Because some customers have been waiting a very long time for their order, and they're not going to let you leave until spring comes. Even if spring never comes again. My name is Tommy Hendricks, and I've been driving snowplows for the Alaska State Highway Department for 8 years. I got this job right after high school when my dad told me it was good, steady work. The pay is decent, and I like being alone on the road. I've always worked the same route, Highway 11 between Fairbanks and Deadhorse. It's a long, empty stretch that runs through some of the most remote wilderness in Alaska. During the polar night season, I don't see sunlight for months. Just me, my plow, and miles of frozen highway. I thought I knew everything about that road. But what happened last winter changed everything I believed about what lives in those dark woods. Some things should stay buried in the snow. I start my shift at 4 a.m. every day. My truck is a 2018 International Workstar with a 12-foot front blade and a salt spreader on the back. She's got 180,000 miles on her, but she runs like new. The cab is warm and has good lights, which matters when you're driving in complete darkness for 10 hours straight. My route takes me 240 miles north through the Brooks Range. On a good day, I can make the round trip in 9 hours, but during heavy snow, it can take 12 or more. The highway cuts through thick forests of black spruce and crosses frozen rivers. There are no gas stations, no houses, nothing for miles, just wilderness. The only signs of life are the truckers heading to and from the oil fields. Most of them know me by now. We talk on CB radio to pass the time. Channel 19 is always busy with drivers warning each other about road conditions and weather. My supervisor is Dave Martinez. He's been with the department for 20 years and knows these roads better than anyone. Dave always tells us to radio in every 2 hours and report any problems. Nobody works alone up here, he says. We watch out for each other. The nearest hospital is in Fairbanks, 3 hours away from the middle of my route. If something goes wrong out there, help takes a long time to arrive. I love the quiet of winter driving. The only sounds are my engine humming and the scrape of the blade on asphalt. Sometimes I see caribou or wolves in my headlights. The aurora borealis dances across the sky on clear nights. It's peaceful. At least, it used to be. December 15th started like any other day. The weather report called for light snow with winds at 15 miles per hour. Perfect plowing conditions. I loaded up with salt and diesel fuel and headed north just as the first snowflakes started falling. The radio was quiet. Most of the truckers were taking a day off because of a storm moving in from the west. About 30 miles north of Fairbanks, I saw something strange. There were footprints in the snow crossing the highway. At first, I thought they might be from a moose or caribou. But when I stopped to look closer, my heart started beating fast. These weren't animal tracks. They looked like human footprints, but they were huge, 18 inches long and shaped like bare feet. But the strangest part was the claw marks at the front of each print. Like someone had long fingernails that dragged in the snow. I've seen plenty of tracks in my 8 years on this job. Bear, moose, wolves, even lynx. These didn't match anything I knew. The prints crossed from the tree line on the east side of the road and went straight into the forest on the west side. I measured the distance between them with my boot. Each step was over 12 feet apart. No human being could take steps that long, not even wearing snowshoes. I radioed Dave about the tracks. Probably just someone with makeshift snowshoes, he said. Hunters sometimes make them big for walking in deep snow. That made sense, but something felt wrong. The prints were too perfect, too deep, like whatever made them was very heavy. I kept driving north, but I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks. I've hiked in snow my whole life. I know what snowshoe prints look like. These were different. They looked like something walking on 2 legs but not wearing any shoes at all. In December in Alaska, that's impossible. You'd get frostbite in minutes. The snow got heavier as I drove. By the time I reached Dead Horse, visibility was down to 50 feet. I cleared the parking areas around the oil facilities and started my trip back south. The truckers were all parked, waiting for the storm to pass. The CB radio was dead quiet except for the static of wind interference. About halfway home, my headlights caught something moving ahead of me. At first, I thought it was a caribou crossing the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was much bigger, and it was walking on 2 legs. I hit my brakes and came to a stop about 100 yards away. The thing in my headlights was the most terrifying sight I've ever seen. It was at least 9 feet tall but thin like a skeleton. Its skin was gray and seemed to glow in the truck lights. Most horrible of all were the antler-like horns growing out of its head. It moved hunched over, like its back was bent permanently. Its arms hung down to its knees, and I could see long claws at the end of its fingers. The creature turned and looked directly at me. Even from that distance, I could see its eyes reflecting my headlights, like an animal's. But there was something intelligent in that stare. Something that understood what I was and what I was doing there. It studied me for what felt like hours but was probably only a few seconds. Then it turned and walked into the tree line on the east side of the road. Within moments, it was gone. I sat in my truck shaking. My hands were sweating even though the cab was cold. I tried to radio Dave, but the storm was interfering with the signal. All I got was static. I thought about turning around and driving back to Dead Horse, but my job was to keep the highway clear. I had to finish my route. I drove slowly for the rest of the trip, watching the tree line on both sides of the road. I didn't see the creature again, but I felt like something was watching me. When I finally got back to the maintenance yard in Fairbanks, it was almost midnight. I was exhausted and scared. The next morning, I did a routine inspection of my truck before heading out. That's when I found the scratches on my front blade. 4 parallel gouges about 6 inches long cut deep into the steel. They looked like claw marks, but they were too big to be from any animal I knew. The metal was scraped away like someone had dragged giant fingernails across it. I showed the scratches to Dave when he came in. "Probably hit some ice or rocks," he said. "Happens all the time in bad weather." But I knew that wasn't right. I've hit plenty of obstacles over the years. These marks were different. They were too clean, too deliberate. Something had clawed my truck. I told Dave about seeing the creature on the highway. He listened without interrupting, but I could tell he thought I was losing my mind. "Tommy, you've been working alone up there for 8 years, he said. "Sometimes the isolation gets to people. Maybe you should take a few days off." I didn't want to take time off. I needed to know what I had seen. That night, I went to the Fairbanks Library and started researching. I looked up every large animal native to Alaska. Bears, moose, wolves, wolverines. Nothing matched what I had encountered. The creature I saw was too tall, too thin, and it walked upright like a human. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. In the local history section, I discovered stories from the native tribes in the area. The Gwich'in people had legends about creatures called wendigos. According to their folklore, wendigos were humans who had been transformed into monsters by eating human flesh during times of starvation. The transformation turned them into giant skeletal beings with an endless hunger for more human meat. The descriptions matched exactly with Helmake, what I had seen. 9 feet tall, gray skin, antler-like horns, and an eternal craving for human flesh. The legends said wendigos were created during harsh winters when people got so hungry they resorted to cannibalism to survive. Once someone ate human meat, they could never go back. They became something else, something evil. I kept reading and found a newspaper article from 2 months earlier. 3 experienced hikers had gone missing in the wilderness along my route. Sarah Chen, Mike Roberts, and David Stone. They were last seen heading into the forest near mile marker 180, right where I had first seen the footprints. Search teams looked for them for 2 weeks but never found any trace. The article said they probably died of exposure, but their bodies were never recovered. The next day, I was nervous about driving my route, but I needed the job, and I wasn't going to let fear stop me from doing my work. I loaded up my truck and headed north, keeping my radio on and checking in with Dave every hour. The weather was clear, and visibility was good. Around mile marker 160, I started seeing the footprints again. They appeared at different places along the highway, always crossing from one side of the forest to the other. Sometimes they followed the road for a short distance before disappearing back into the trees. I noticed they were getting larger and deeper, like whatever was making them was growing bigger and heavier. As the days passed, I started seeing the creature more often. It would appear at the edge of my headlight beams, watching me from the tree line. It never came close to the road, but it was always there. Keeping pace with my truck as I drove north and south, I felt like it was studying my schedule, learning my routine. I wasn't the only one seeing things. Other drivers started reporting strange sightings on the CB radio. Bill Henderson, who drives freight to Dead Horse, said he saw something tall running through the trees parallel to his truck. Jenny Walsh, who plows the southern section of Highway 11, found giant footprints near her turnaround point. We all started talking about it, trying to figure out what was happening. Dave called a meeting with all the highway crew. "I'm hearing too many weird stories," he said. "I need everyone to stay focused on their jobs and stop scaring each other with ghost stories." But I could tell he was worried too. He started requiring us to radio in every hour instead of every 2 hours. The creature's behavior was changing. I started finding dead animals along my route. Caribou with their sides torn open and partially eaten. Wolves killed and left on the highway. The bite marks didn't look like they came from any animal I knew. They looked almost human, but bigger. Whatever was killing these animals had teeth like a person, but much larger and sharper. The worst part was finding pieces of clothing caught on trees and fence posts. Scraps of fabric that looked like hiking gear. I found a piece of bright orange material that could have been from a winter jacket, the kind serious hikers wear in Alaska. When I compared it to the description of the missing hiker's equipment, my heart sank. The orange jacket matched what Sarah Chen was wearing when she disappeared. I started carrying my rifle in the truck. It's a .30-06 that belonged to my grandfather. I know how to use it, and it's powerful enough to stop a bear. I hoped it would be enough to protect me if the creature decided to attack. I kept my windows rolled up and my doors locked at all times. I never got out of the truck except at the maintenance yards. The creature became bolder. Instead of staying in the trees, it started appearing on the highway itself. I would see it standing in the middle of the road ahead of me, watching my truck approach. When I got within 100 yards, it would step aside and disappear into the forest. But each time, it waited a little longer before moving, like it was testing how close I would get. Other drivers started refusing to work certain sections of Highway 11. Bill Henderson asked Dave to switch him to a different route. "There's something wrong up there," he said. "I've been driving these roads for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Jenny Walsh started driving in pairs with another plow operator. Nobody wanted to be alone on the highway anymore. The attacks on wildlife got worse. I found a moose that had been killed and partially eaten. The creature had torn it apart with incredible strength. Some of the bones were cracked open, and the marrow was gone. I remembered reading that Wendigos craved bone marrow above all other food. It was another piece of evidence that I was dealing with something from native legend. I started finding gifts left for me on the highway. Dead rabbits arranged in patterns on the road. Fish placed on my windshield while I was plowing side roads. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but the placement was too deliberate. Something was leaving these offerings specifically for me, like it was trying to communicate or show appreciation. The gifts got bigger and more disturbing. I found a freshly killed wolf placed directly in my driving path. Its stomach had been opened and emptied, but the meat was still warm. Someone or something had just killed it and left it for me to find. The creature was showing me its hunting skills, displaying its power. That's when I realized the footprints had appeared around my house in Fairbanks. I lived alone in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. When I came home from work one morning, I found the giant tracks circling my property. They went around my house 3 times and then headed back toward the forest. The creature had learned where I lived. It was stalking me even when I wasn't working. I called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. Officer Janet Mills came out to look at the tracks. "Probably just some ethnic kids playing a prank," she said. "Maybe they made fake feet to scare you." But I could tell she was disturbed by the size and depth of the prints. These weren't made by kids wearing fake feet. Something very heavy had walked around my house. I asked Dave to transfer me to a different route. "I need a change," I told him. "Maybe the southern highways toward Anchorage." Dave was understanding. He knew I had been under stress from all the strange sightings. "Take the Anchorage route starting Monday," he said. "Maybe the change of scenery will help." But the creature followed me. On my second day working the new route, I saw it watching me from a hillside. It had traveled over 100 miles to find me. This wasn't just random behavior. The creature had formed some kind of attachment to me specifically. I was being hunted by something that could cover vast distances through the Alaskan wilderness. None of the other drivers wanted to take over my old route. "That stretch is cursed," Bill Henderson said. "Whatever's up there, it's not natural." Dave had to offer extra pay to get anyone to cover Highway 11. Even then, drivers would only work it in pairs and only during daylight hours. I decided I had to end this. The creature was getting stronger and more aggressive. The legend said Wendigos grew more powerful by eating flesh. If this thing had killed and eaten the 3 missing hikers, it was probably much stronger now than when I first saw it. Eventually, it would attack someone. Maybe me, maybe another driver, maybe someone just traveling through. I made a plan to lure it into a trap. I would use myself as bait and try to kill it with my rifle. I studied my old route and picked a spot near mile marker 180, close to where the hikers had disappeared. There was a sharp curve with thick forest on both sides. If I could get the creature to chase me, I might be able to get a clear shot. I told Dave I wanted to work one more day on my old route, just to prove to myself that I'm not crazy, I said. He was reluctant but agreed. "Take the radio," he said. "Check in every 30 minutes. If I don't hear from you, I'm sending a search team." I loaded my truck with extra fuel and ammunition. I brought flares, a spotlight, and emergency food. If this went wrong, I might be stuck out there for days waiting for rescue. But I couldn't live with the fear anymore. The creature had taken control of my life. I needed to take it back. I started my route at 4 a.m. as usual. The weather was clear and cold, about 20 below zero. Perfect visibility for what I planned to do. I drove north slowly, watching for signs of the creature. I found fresh footprints at mile marker 160, heading east into the forest. The creature was in the area. At mile marker 180, I stopped my truck and got out. I left the engine running and the lights on. I wanted the creature to know exactly where I was. I took my rifle and walked to the edge of the tree line. "Come on," I shouted into the forest. "I know you're there. I know what you did to those hikers." I waited in the cold for 20 minutes. My breath was freezing in the air, and my hands were going numb even with gloves on. I was about to give up when I heard branches breaking in the forest. Something big was moving through the trees, heading toward me. The creature stepped out of the forest about 50 yards away. In the glare of my truck's headlights, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was even more terrifying up close. Its gray skin was stretched tight over bones that jutted out at sharp angles. Its face was a horrible mix of human and animal features. The antler-like horns growing from its skull were covered in dried blood, but the worst part was its eyes. They were intelligent and filled with an endless, desperate hunger. I raised my rifle and took aim. But before I could fire, the creature charged at me. It moved incredibly fast for something so large. I barely had time to dive behind my truck before it reached me. Its claws scraped across the truck's hood, leaving deep gouges in the metal. I crawled under the truck and fired upward. The bullet hit the creature in the leg, and it let out a sound I'll never forget. Part roar, part scream, part human crying. Black blood splattered on the snow, and the smell was like rotting meat mixed with sulfur. The creature limped away from the truck, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it began circling me, looking for another angle of attack. I could see pieces of fabric hanging from its body, scraps of the hiker's clothing that it had incorporated into its own flesh somehow. The orange jacket material was embedded in its shoulder like a grotesque decoration. I stayed under the truck and tried to keep the creature in sight. It was bleeding, but the wound didn't seem to slow it down much. If anything, it looked angrier. It grabbed the front of my truck and tried to flip it over. The whole vehicle shook, and I could hear metal bending. This thing was strong enough to destroy my truck with its bare hands. I rolled out from under the truck and ran toward the forest. I needed space to get another shot. The creature followed me, crashing through the underbrush like a freight train. I turned and fired again, hitting it in the chest. More black blood sprayed across the trees, but it kept coming. We fought for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I used every bullet in my rifle, hitting the creature multiple times. It was wounded badly, but refused to go down. Finally, it grabbed a fallen tree branch and swung it at me like a club. I dodged, but the branch caught my shoulder and knocked me to the ground. The creature stood over me, blood dripping from its wounds onto my face. Up close, I could see human teeth mixed with fangs in its mouth. It had definitely been human once, but now it was something else entirely. Something that should not exist in the natural world. Just as it raised its claws to finish me, we heard the sound of diesel engines approaching. Dave had sent a search team when I missed my radio check-in. The creature looked toward the highway, then back at me. For a moment, I thought it might attack anyway, but survival instinct won out. It turned and disappeared into the deep forest, moving faster than seemed possible for something so badly wounded. The search team found me lying in the snow, covered in the creature's black blood. I was hypothermic and in shock, but alive. They loaded me into a warm truck and drove me to the hospital in Fairbanks. I spent 3 days recovering from frostbite and exposure. Dave visited me in the hospital. "What happened out there?" he asked. I told him the truth, but I could tell he didn't believe me. The official report said I had suffered hallucinations due to extreme cold and isolation. There was no mention of the creature or the black blood that had covered my clothes. I never went back to work as a snowplow driver. I couldn't handle being alone on those dark highways anymore. I took a job at a grocery store in Fairbanks, where I work with other people and never have to drive through the wilderness at night. The creature's blood in the snow turned completely black over the next few days and then disappeared entirely. The search team found the area where we had fought, but there was no trace of blood or any other evidence. It was like the whole encounter had been erased. I never saw the creature again on Highway 11. But 2 months later, snowplow drivers near Barrow, 300 miles north, started reporting identical sightings. Giant footprints crossing the highway, a skeletal figure with antlers watching from the tree line. Fresh kills left on the road. I think the creature moved north, following the oil pipeline route toward more remote areas where there are fewer people and less chance of being hunted. The Wendigo is still out there somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness. Still hungry, still growing stronger. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up thinking I hear claws scratching at my windows. I know it's just my imagination, but the fear never really goes away. I learned that some things from old legends are real, and some hungers can never be satisfied. If you ever find yourself driving alone through the remote highways of Alaska during the dark winter months, keep your doors locked and your radio on. If you see giant footprints in the snow or catch sight of something tall and gray watching you from the forest, don't stop to investigate. Just keep driving and pray it doesn't decide to follow you home. The wilderness is vast and full of secrets. Some of them are better left buried in the snow. My name is Lisa Hartwell, and I've been working the night shift at remote gas stations for 8 years. I started in Texas, then moved to Colorado, and finally ended up in Alaska. You might wonder why someone would choose to work alone in the middle of nowhere during the coldest months of the year. The pay is good, really good. Triple what you'd make at a regular gas station. Plus, I like the quiet, or at least, I used to. I worked at milepost 347 on the Dalton Highway, about 60 miles south of Deadhorse. If you don't know Alaska, that's as remote as it gets. The Dalton Highway is basically a truck route that goes straight up to the oil fields. During winter, which lasts about 8 months up there, we get maybe 15 customers on a busy night. Most are truckers hauling supplies north, or hunters coming back from the interior. The station isn't much to look at. It's a small building with 2 gas pumps out front, a tiny convenience store, and a back office where I spent most of my time. The whole place runs on a generator because we're too far from any power grid. Heat comes from a propane system that works most of the time. When it doesn't, the inside temperature drops to whatever it is outside, which in December can be 40 below zero. I knew my regular customers by name, truck, and what they usually bought. Frank Morrison was one of them. He drove a red Peterbilt and had been hauling freight up and down the Dalton for 15 years. Frank always stopped at my station on his way north, usually around 2 a.m. He'd get diesel, a coffee, and a pack of Marlboro Reds. He'd chat for maybe 10 minutes about the road conditions or the weather, then head out. Frank was probably 50 years old, maybe 6 feet tall, with gray hair and a beard. He had kind eyes and always asked how I was doing. That December night started like any other. The temperature was 38 below, and the wind was howling. I'd only had 3 customers since my shift started at 10 p.m. Around 1:45 a.m., I saw headlights coming up the highway from the south. The lights looked right, high beams on a big truck. As it got closer, I could see it was Frank's red Peterbilt. Frank pulled up to pump 2, same as always. But something felt off right away. He got out of his truck differently. Usually, Frank moved quick and easy, even in the cold. This time he climbed down slow and stiff, like his joints hurt. I figured maybe he was getting sick or had been driving too long. Then I noticed he kept his face turned away from the security cameras. Frank never cared about the cameras before. He'd wave at them sometimes, knowing I was watching from inside. But now he kept his head down and his back to them while he pumped gas. When he came inside to pay, that's when I knew something was really wrong. Frank's voice sounded different. It was deeper, more rough than usual, like he had a bad cold or had been smoking too much. But it wasn't just sick sounding. It was like someone trying to copy Frank's voice, but not getting it quite right. "Evening, Lisa," he said, not looking directly at me. "Cold one tonight." "Hey, Frank," I replied, watching him carefully. "You okay? You sound a little off." He stood at the counter, still not meeting my eyes. "Just tired. Long haul up from Fairbanks." But Frank's regular route was from Anchorage, not Fairbanks. I'd heard him talk about it dozens of times. I decided to test him. "How's your wife Sarah doing?" I asked. Frank's head snapped up for just a second, and I got a good look at his eyes. They seemed wrong somehow, too bright, too focused, like an animal looking at prey. "She's fine," he said quickly. "Just fine. The thing is, Frank's wife died 3 years ago in a car accident. He'd told me about it himself, how hard it was being on the road without her waiting at home. The real Frank would never have said she was fine. Frank bought his usual coffee and cigarettes, but he paid with cash, instead of his company credit card. He always used the credit card. As he turned to leave, I noticed something else strange. He walked different. Not just stiff, but like he wasn't used to walking on 2 legs, like he had to think about each step. "Drive safe," I called out, same as I always did. He stopped at the door and looked back at me. When the light hit his face just right, I swear his eyes reflected the fluorescent lights like an animal's eyes do. Dogs, cats, deer, they all get that bright shine when light hits them at night. Human eyes don't do that. "I'll be back through in a couple days," he said. "Maybe we can talk more then." That was weird too. Frank never said things like that. He was friendly but not personal. He certainly never suggested we should talk more. After he left, I went straight to the security monitor to review the footage from his visit. We had 4 cameras, 2 outside watching the pumps, 1 at the front door, and 1 behind the counter. I pulled up the recordings from when Frank arrived. What I saw made my blood run cold. On camera, Frank looked normal most of the time. But in some frames, his image seemed to flicker or glitch. At first I thought it was a problem with the camera system, but it only happened around Frank. In a few frames, especially when he turned his head quickly, his face looked different. Wrong. In one frame, his face was longer and narrower. In another, his mouth seemed too wide. But the worst one was when he looked up at the camera. For just one frame, maybe a 30th of a second, Frank's face wasn't human at all. It looked like a wolf or a coyote, with a long snout and pointed ears. I watched the footage over and over, but those weird frames were always there. Frank's image would be normal, then flicker to something else, then back to normal. Like something was wearing Frank's appearance but couldn't keep it steady. I called Frank's cell phone. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. That wasn't unusual. Cell service was spotty on the highway, but his voicemail message was different. Usually Frank's message was just, "This is Frank, leave a message." Now it was, "You've reached Frank Morrison, please leave a detailed message." Detailed message? Frank wasn't the type to use words like that. I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Around 4 a.m., I started researching online. I'd heard of skinwalkers before, Navajo legends about witches who could transform into animals. But this was Alaska, not the Southwest. I searched for Alaska shapeshifter legends and found similar stories from local native tribes. The Yupik and Inupiat people had tales of creatures called Chimiksuli, things that could steal the appearance of humans by wearing their skin like clothes. According to the stories, these creatures would kill someone, take their form, and live among people undetected. The more I read, the more scared I got. The descriptions matched what I'd seen: the awkward movements, the reflected eyes, the voice that was almost right but not quite. These creatures supposedly studied their victims for a long time before replacing them, learning their habits and routines. Had this thing been watching Frank, learning how to be him? I didn't sleep much that day. When I came back to work the next night, I checked the security system extra carefully. I made sure all the cameras were working and the recordings were saving properly. If that thing came back pretending to be Frank, I wanted evidence. It showed up around 2:15 a.m. This time, the differences were more obvious. Not Frank moved like he was concentrating hard on walking normally. He pumped gas with his back to all the cameras, like he knew exactly where they were. When he came inside, he kept his head down and his hood up. "Evening," he said in that too deep voice. "Hey there," I replied, trying to sound normal. "Frank, right?" He looked up sharply. "Of course it's Frank, you know me." But he said it like he was angry that I'd questioned him. The real Frank was never angry, especially not at me. I decided to test him again. "How's the road north of Alaskan Pass?" I asked. Frank had driven that route hundreds of times. He'd know the road conditions, especially in winter. But not Frank just stared at me. "It's fine," he said slowly. "Just fine." Real Frank would have given me details about ice, wind, or snow. He'd have mentioned specific mile markers or trouble spots. This thing didn't know any of that. While he was browsing the store, I watched him carefully. He didn't blink normally. When he did blink, his eyelids moved sideways, like a reptile or bird. When he opened his mouth to speak, I saw too many teeth. Not bigger teeth, but more of them, like they were packed too tight in his mouth. He bought different items than usual. Real Frank always got coffee and Marlboro Reds. This thing got energy drinks and beef jerky. It paid with cash again, and when it handed me the money, I saw its fingernails were too long and too sharp. After it left, I immediately called Frank's phone again. No answer. This time I called his trucking company. The dispatcher said Frank had checked in from Anchorage 2 days ago, but hadn't been heard from since. He was supposed to deliver a load to Deadhorse, but never showed up. That's when I knew for sure. The real Frank was missing, probably dead. This thing had taken his place. I should have called the police right then, but what would I tell them? That a shape-shifting monster was pretending to be a truck driver? They'd think I was crazy or having a breakdown from isolation. Instead, I decided to gather more evidence. If this thing was going to keep coming back, I'd document everything. Maybe I could figure out what happened to the real Frank. Over the next week, Not Frank visited 3 more times. Each time, it got a little better at acting human, but it was still wrong in small ways. It started remembering to use Frank's credit card, but the signature was different. It knew to order coffee, but it drank it black when real Frank always used cream and sugar. The worst part was watching it study me. It asked questions about my schedule, when I worked, if I lived alone. Real Frank never asked personal stuff like that. This thing was learning about me the same way it had learned about Frank. Then other regular customers started acting strange. Jim Torres was a trucker who hauled gear to the oil fields. He'd been stopping at my station for 2 years. But when Jim came in last Tuesday, something was off. He had different tattoos on his arms. I'd seen Jim's tattoos hundreds of times, a skull on his left forearm and USMC on his right shoulder. Now he had a snake on his left arm and an eagle on his right. When I asked about his wife Maria, Jim looked confused. "Who's Maria?" he asked. Jim talked about Maria all the time. They'd been married 12 years and had 3 kids, but this Jim didn't know who she was. Then there was Bob Chen, a hunter who came through every few weeks. Bob always bought the same things: gas, coffee, and Camel cigarettes. He always paid with a worn Visa card that had his name scratched into the plastic. But when Bob came in Thursday night, he tried to buy Marlboro Lights and pay with a shiny new MasterCard under a different name. "This isn't your card," I told him. Bob Thing looked at the card like he'd never seen it before. "Oh, right, wrong card." He pulled out another one, but it had a woman's name on it. I started testing all my regular customers with personal questions. "How many kids do you have? What's your wife's name? Where did you grow up?" One by one, they were failing the tests. The thing wasn't just replacing Frank, it was replacing all of them. I found surveillance photos in Not Frank's truck one night when it left the keys on the counter. The photos showed other customers, people who lived in the area, even the day shift clerk who worked at my station. It was planning to replace more people. I tried calling the state police, but the trooper station was 150 miles away. When I finally got through, the dispatcher said they'd send someone when they could, but it might be days. Winter storms had closed most of the roads. That's when Not Frank cornered me. It was a Friday night, about 3 a.m. I was alone as usual when the red Peterbilt pulled up, but this time, Not Frank didn't pump gas. It came straight into the store. "Hello, Lisa," it said, and its voice was different again, clearer, more confident. "We need to talk." It locked the front door behind it and flipped the sign to closed. I reached for the phone, but it grabbed my wrist. Its grip was too strong, and its skin felt wrong, too cold and too rough, like leather. "I know you've been watching me," it said, asking questions, making phone calls. Up close, I could see that its face wasn't quite right. The proportions were off. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too wide. It was like looking at a human face drawn by someone who had only heard humans described but never seen one. "What did you do to Frank?" I asked. It smiled, and I saw all those extra teeth. "Frank is gone. I am Frank now. Where's his body? Does it matter? I wear his skin. I drive his truck. I know his life. I am more Frank than Frank ever was." The thing started changing as we talked. Its face got longer and narrower. Its nose stretched out into a snout. Hair grew thick on its cheeks and forehead. But it still wore Frank's clothes, Frank's jacket, Frank's wedding ring. "You've been very helpful, Lisa," it said in a voice that was becoming more growl than speech. "You see all the people who come through here. You know their routines, their habits. You've helped me learn to be them." I realized it had been using me. Every time I'd tested one of the fake customers, I'd given it information about the real people. I'd helped it perfect its disguises. "How many?" I asked. 11 so far. But there will be more. This place is perfect for hunting. People come through alone on schedule. No one misses them for days." It reached into Frank's jacket and pulled out what looked like a piece of dried skin, folded like fabric. As I watched, it shook out the skin, and I could see it was shaped like a human face and scalp. It was covered in long brown hair. My hair. "I've been watching you too, Lisa. Learning your voice, your movements. Soon there will be 2 Lisas. I'll work your shifts, take your pay, live your life." The thing started pulling Frank's skin off its head like taking off a mask. Underneath was something that looked like a wolf, but wrong. Too big, with too many teeth and eyes that were too intelligent. I grabbed the shotgun we kept behind the counter for bears and robberies. The thing lunged at me just as I pulled the trigger. The blast caught it in the shoulder and spun it around, but it didn't go down. Instead, it howled, a sound like a wolf and a human screaming at the same time. It crashed through the front window and ran into the darkness. I could hear it howling out there, but the sound was getting farther away. I called 911, and this time I didn't care how crazy I sounded. I told them everything. The shapeshifter, the missing people, all of it. Maybe it was the terror in my voice, but they sent a helicopter from Fairbanks. When the troopers arrived, we found the bodies. They were buried in a grove of trees about a mile from the station. Frank, Jim, Bob, and 8 other people I'd never seen before. The thing had been killing and replacing people all along the highway for months. They never found the creature. The trail disappeared into the wilderness, and Alaska has millions of acres where something could hide. The investigation made the news for a few weeks, but without the creature to catch, people lost interest. I quit that night and moved to Anchorage, then Seattle. Now I live in Miami, about as far from remote Alaska as I can get. I work at a busy gas station on a main road where there are always people around. But sometimes, in a crowd, I'll see someone who looks familiar. A truck driver with Frank's build, a hunter with Bob's jacket. They're always too far away to get a good look, and when I try to follow them, they disappear. The thing is still out there, wearing stolen faces, living stolen lives. And sometimes I wonder, if it can perfectly copy someone's appearance, how would I know if it found me here? How would I know if the person talking to me, working next to me, living in my building, is really human? That's why I don't work alone anymore. Why I moved to the city. Why I check the mirrors constantly and test people with questions about their past. Because somewhere out there, a creature is wearing Frank Morrison's face and driving his truck. It's learned to be human almost perfectly, and it's still hunting for new people to become. If you work in a remote place, if you have regular customers who come through alone, watch them carefully. Notice the small changes. Test them with personal questions. And if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Because the thing wearing their face is watching you too, learning to be you. And once it decides you'd make a good skin to wear, it's very hard to stop. I still have Frank's last voicemail saved on my phone. Sometimes I listen to it, trying to remember what the real Frank sounded like. But I'm starting to forget. The thing's voice is taking over my memories, replacing them with its own. That's what scares me most. Not just that it can steal someone's body, but that it can steal their memory too. erase who they really were and replace it with its own version. Frank Morrison was a good man who loved his wife and did his job honestly for 15 years. He deserves to be remembered as himself, not as the thing that wears his face. But I'm the only one left who knows the difference. And every day, it gets a little harder to remember which Frank was real. My name is Dave Martinez, and I've been working security for 12 years. I started right after high school when jobs were hard to find in Fairbanks. Alaska doesn't give you many choices if you don't want to work on the oil rigs. Security seemed easy enough. Walk around, watch for trouble, write reports. I've worked everything from office buildings to construction sites to apartment complexes. I've dealt with break-ins, drunk people, and even a few fights. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened during those 3 weeks at Northgate Mall. What I experienced there made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. The mall had been closed for 3 years when I got the job. The place went under during the recession when people stopped shopping and started buying everything online. But the insurance companies still needed someone to patrol it. Empty buildings are targets for vandals, squatters, and copper thieves. My job was simple: walk the hallways twice a night, check all the entrances, and make sure nobody was inside who shouldn't be. The money was decent, and I needed it. My ex-wife Sarah was always asking for more child support for our daughter Emma. My dad had just passed away from cancer, and the medical bills were still coming in even though he was gone. Working nights meant I could pick up day shifts at other sites too. It was perfect, except for one thing. The mall gave me the creeps. Northgate Mall was huge. 2 floors with about 90 stores, plus a food court and a department store at each end. During the day, some light came through the skylights, but at night, my flashlight was the only thing cutting through the darkness. The emergency lighting barely worked, and half the bulbs were burned out. The place smelled like dust and old carpet cleaner. My first week went fine. I'd park by the main entrance, use my key to get inside, and start my rounds. The old Radio Shack, GameStop, jewelry stores, empty, with metal gates pulled down over the storefronts. Some still had mannequins in the windows, which was creepy enough. The whole place felt like a museum of dead capitalism. I carried a heavy flashlight, a radio that connected to the security company's dispatch, and my cell phone. The mall still had power to the main areas, but most of the store interiors were dark. My route took about an hour, ground floor first, then upstairs, then back down through the food court. The food court was the worst part. All those empty restaurants with their chairs stacked on tables. The old Sparrow still had a sign hanging crooked over the counter. There was a fountain in the center that had been drained, just a concrete circle filled with dead leaves and trash. Every step I took echoed off the high ceiling. It was during my second week that things started getting weird. I was doing my Tuesday night patrol when I heard footsteps coming from the food court. Not my footsteps, these were different, quicker, like someone was walking fast trying to get somewhere. I stopped and listened. The sound bounced around so much I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, but it was definitely footsteps. I called out, "Security! If someone's in here, you need to come out now." The footsteps stopped. I waited about 30 seconds, then started walking toward the food court, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. That's when I saw them. Wet footprints on the tile floor. They started right in front of the old Chinese place and went in a straight line toward the fountain. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The prints looked human, but the spacing was all wrong. Some steps were normal, like someone walking. Others were huge, like someone had jumped. Then tiny steps, like a child. It made no sense. I followed the trail with my flashlight. The prints were definitely wet, like someone had stepped in water, but there was no water anywhere in the food court. The Donner/Preple trail led right to the edge of the empty fountain and just stopped. I shined my light into the fountain, nothing but old leaves and a few plastic cups. I radioed dispatch. "This is Dave at Northgate. I found evidence of someone inside the building, requesting backup." "Copy that, Dave. Police are 20 minutes out. Stay safe." I spent the next 20 minutes searching every store on both floors. Every entrance was still locked. Every gate was still secure. When the police arrived, I showed them the footprints, but by then they had dried up and were barely visible. The officer took a quick look around and told me it was probably just condensation from the old heating system dripping on the floor. but I knew what I saw. The next night, I brought a camera with me. If something weird happened again, I wanted proof. I didn't have to wait long. I was upstairs, near the old Spencer's, when I heard voices. Not just one voice, multiple people talking and laughing. It sounded like a group of friends hanging out, maybe teenagers. The sound was coming from somewhere downstairs. I crept to the railing and looked down at the main floor. My flashlight beam swept across the empty storefronts, but I didn't see anyone. The voices continued. Definitely people talking, but I couldn't make out words. It was like hearing a conversation through a wall. That's when I heard something that made my blood freeze. One of the voices said, "Dave, Dave, where are you?" It was my friend Mike's voice. I knew it instantly. Mike and I had been friends since middle school, but Mike lived in Anchorage, 300 miles away. There was no way he was in this mall. "Dave, come find us." This time it was my brother, Tony. He lived in Seattle. The voices were coming from the jewelry store near the center of the mall. I went downstairs and walked toward the sound, my heart hammering. The voices got clearer as I got closer. "Remember when we went fishing last summer? That was definitely Mike." "That was so much fun, Dave." "Yeah, and when you caught that huge salmon," Tony added. "You were so proud." But here's the thing, I hadn't been fishing with either of them last summer. Mike and I hadn't hung out in over a year, and Tony and I barely talked since Dad died. I reached the jewelry store and shined my flashlight through the security gate. The store was completely empty. No people, no furniture, nothing. But the voices continued, coming from inside the empty space. "Dave, why won't you come in?" Mike's voice again. "We're waiting for you." I tried to record it with my phone, but when I played it back, there was nothing but silence. The recording was blank. This went on for the rest of my shift. Voices of people I knew, calling to me from empty stores. My ex-wife Sarah from the old Victoria's Secret. My coworker Jeff from the shoe store. Even my daughter Emma, asking why Daddy never came to see her anymore. But the worst was when I heard my father's voice. I was walking past the old Radio Shack when I heard him. "Dave, son, I need help. I'm hurt." My dad had been dead for 2 months. I knew this wasn't real, but hearing his voice broke something inside me. He sounded exactly like he did during his last days in the hospital, weak and scared. "Please, Dave, don't leave me alone." I stood outside that Radio Shack for 10 minutes, crying like a baby. I knew it wasn't really him, but the voice was perfect. Every inflection, every pause. How could anything fake my father's voice so perfectly? The third week was when I realized what I was dealing with wasn't human. The voices became more sophisticated. Instead of just calling my name, they started having full conversations. I'd hear Mike and Tony talking about me like I wasn't there. "Dave's been acting weird lately," Mike's voice said from the old GameStop. "Ever since his dad died, he's been different." "Yeah, I'm worried about him," Tony replied. "He won't return my calls. He's probably drinking again. Remember how bad he got after the divorce?" They were discussing things that never happened, private conversations that existed only in my head. But somehow, this thing was pulling these thoughts out of my mind and making them real. It got worse. I started hearing conversations from my past, played back to me word for word. Arguments with Sarah from our divorce. The last conversation I had with my dad before he got sick. Even embarrassing things I'd said as a kid that I thought nobody else remembered. One night, I heard what sounded like my entire family having dinner without me. The voices were coming from the old department store at the end of the mall. My mom, my brother, my aunt, my cousins, all talking about how disappointed they were in me. "Dave never calls anymore," my mom's voice said. "I don't know what happened to him." "He's always been selfish," my aunt replied, "even as a child." They went on like this for an hour, listing every mistake I'd ever made, every time I'd let someone down. Things that were true, things that hurt to hear, things I'd never told anyone. That's when I understood. This wasn't just mimicking voices. It was inside my head, reading my memories, my fears, my guilt. It knew everything about me, and it was using that knowledge to torture me. I tried to quit. I called my supervisor and told him I couldn't work at the mall anymore. I made up some excuse about a family emergency, but something strange happened. Every night, I found myself driving back to Northgate. I'd tell myself I was just going to drive by and make sure everything was okay. Then I'd find myself parked outside with my keys in my hand, It was like the thing in the mall was calling me back. By the end of the third week, it wasn't just voices anymore. I started seeing people. I was walking through the main corridor when I saw my parents shopping in one of the empty Faith stores. They looked exactly right. My dad in his blue jacket, my mom carrying her old purse. But something was off about the way they moved. They kept repeating the same actions over and over. My dad would point at something that wasn't there. My mom would nod. Then they'd both turn and point at the same empty space. When I got closer, they looked at me and smiled. But their faces were wrong. The expressions were too wide, held too long, like someone was wearing masks of my parents and didn't know how to use them properly. "Hello, Dave," my dad said. "We've been waiting for you." "Come shopping with us," my mom added, "just like when you were little." But I was never little when this mall was open. It was built when I was already in high school. I ran. I actually ran through that mall like a scared kid, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I headed for the exit. Behind me, I heard my parents' voices calling, "Dave, come back, don't leave us again." I made it to my car and sat there shaking. That's when I realized I'd been working at this mall for 3 weeks and had never asked why the previous security guard had quit. The next day, I went to the security company's office and asked about the guy before me. My supervisor, Janet, got a weird look on her face. "Dave, you're the 4th guard we've sent to that mall in 6 months?" she said. "The others all quit after a few weeks, said they were hearing things." "What kind of things?" "Voices. People who weren't there. One guy said he saw his dead brother walking around the food court." She showed me the incident reports. 4 different guards, all reporting the same thing, the voices of people they knew coming from empty stores. All of them quit suddenly, claiming the place was haunted. "Why didn't you tell me this before you sent me there?" I asked. Janet shrugged. "Because we need someone to patrol that mall, and insurance requires it. If we told every guard what the others reported, we'd never fill the position." That night, I went back to Northgate one last time. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I brought a voice recorder, a digital camera, and a notepad. If this thing was feeding on my memories and emotions, I was going to try something different. I was going to starve it. The voices started as soon as I walked in. My dad calling for help, Sarah begging me to come find her, Mike and Tony making fun of me. But this time, I didn't react. I walked my route like normal, taking notes but not responding to anything I heard. The voices got more desperate. I heard Emma crying, saying she missed Daddy. I heard my mom telling me she was proud of me. I heard my dad apologizing for being a burden during his illness. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, ignoring those voices. Every instinct told me to respond, to comfort them, to defend myself, but I knew they weren't real. That's when the thing got angry. The voices became distorted, like someone was playing recordings at the wrong speed. I heard myself saying horrible things about people I loved. Words I'd never say, thoughts I'd never think. The thing was trying to make me feel guilty, trying to get an emotional reaction. Then it showed me its true form. I was walking past the fountain when every voice I'd heard over the past 3 weeks started talking at once. My parents, my friends, my family, all speaking simultaneously, creating a horrible chorus of noise. The sound was coming from the fountain. I shined my flashlight into the empty concrete circle and saw something that will haunt me forever. It was like a pile of faces, all writhing and shifting over each other. My dad's face, Sarah's face, Mike's face, dozens of people I knew, all connected to this shapeless mass of flesh. The faces were moving their mouths, and that's where all the voices were coming from. But it wasn't just people I knew. There were other faces too, people I didn't recognize. Previous security guards, probably. Maybe other people who had encountered this thing over the years. The mass of faces looked at me and spoke in unison. "Don't leave us, Dave. We're lonely here. Stay with us forever." I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off it. That's when I understood what this thing was. When the mall died, when all the life and energy left this place, something filled the void. A parasite that fed on human memories and emotions. It was trapped here, unable to leave, surviving on the mental energy of anyone who entered. I made it to the exit and never looked back. The next morning, I called the property management company and told them what I'd found. They thought I was crazy, but I convinced them to seal the building permanently. They welded metal plates over all the entrances and put up no trespassing signs. That was 2 years ago. The mall is still sealed, and I hope it stays that way forever. I found a different job doing security at a busy hospital. Plenty of people around, plenty of life and noise. I never work alone anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear my dad's voice calling my name. But now I know it's just an echo, a memory that thing pulled from my mind and left behind. I've learned to ignore it. If you're ever offered a security job at an abandoned building, especially one that's been empty for a long time, ask questions. Ask why the previous guards quit. Ask if anyone has reported strange experiences. And if something calls your name in an empty place, don't answer. Just walk away. Some places are empty for a good reason. And some things that live in empty places should stay trapped there forever. I still drive past Northgate Mall sometimes on my way to work. The metal plates are still there, rusty now but holding strong. I never stop. I never get out of my car. Because I know it's still in there, waiting. And part of me is afraid that if I get too close, I'll hear my name being called from inside those sealed walls. That's something I never want to hear again. My name is Janet Morrison. I need to get this on record before I lose my nerve. What happened on Route 47 during the polar night of 2023? People need to know. The Postal Service buried it. The state troopers filed it under wildlife encounters. But I was there. I saw what really happened. I've been carrying mail for 15 years. Started in downtown Anchorage, but for the last 8 years, I worked the most isolated route in Alaska, Route 47. 200 square miles of wilderness serving 47 homes scattered across terrain so remote that GPS doesn't work half the time. During polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for 67 days, I'm the only human contact some of these people see. My truck is a 1,994 Grumman LLV with 340,000 miles. The heater died 3 winters ago. I keep chemical hand warmers in my pockets and wear 2 pairs of gloves. My route takes 6 hours on clear days, sometimes 14 when the snow's bad. I carry bear spray, road flares, emergency food, and a .38 revolver, licensed and registered. In 15 years, I never fired it once, until December 21, 2023, the winter solstice. The darkest day of the year. It started 3 weeks earlier, November 30th. I was delivering to the Hendersons' place. They've got a 3-year-old daughter named Emma who always runs to see me. But that day, their windows were boarded with fresh plywood. John Henderson met me at the truck, wouldn't let me walk to the mailbox. "Just hand it here, Janet," he said, eyes darting toward the tree line. His hands shook as he took the package. "Everything okay, John?" "Something's been prowling around at night. Found tracks this morning, big ones, too big for wolves." I looked where he pointed. In the snow around their mailbox were prints I'd never seen before. They looked almost like handprints, 5 clear finger impressions, but each one ended in deep gouges where claws had dug into the frozen ground. The prints showed something, crawling on all fours, not walking upright. "Probably just a bear," I told him, but even as I said it, the prints looked wrong. Too deliberate. Too intelligent. Over the next week, I found similar tracks at 8 more houses. Always around the mailboxes, always after I'd made my deliveries. Like something was checking each location after I left, learning my schedule. Mrs. Kowalski, 84 years old and tough as nails, was the first to see it clearly. "Janet, honey," she whispered when I brought her Social Security check. "There's something living in the woods that ain't natural. Saw it 3 nights ago, crawling across my yard. Pale as bone, thin as a scarecrow, but it moved like a spider. Fast, too fast." The scratches appeared on December 5th. Deep gouges in the metal mailbox posts. His lines perfectly spaced. Too precise for any animal I knew. The marks were fresh, made sometime between my deliveries and the next morning. By December 10th, every mailbox on my route showed the same scratches. The residents were terrified. Martha Yates, a retired teacher who'd lived alone for 30 years, asked me to start honking my horn when I arrived, so she'd know it was really me. "It scratches at my door every night around midnight," she told me. "Same pattern, 4 scratches, pause, 4 more. Like it's trying to communicate." That's when I realized my truck was being watched. Every day, as I made my rounds, I caught glimpses of something pale moving through the trees, always staying just out of direct sight. It was following my route, learning the pattern. On December 12th, I found evidence that something had been inside my truck overnight. The lock wasn't broken. No signs of forced entry, but my delivery bags had been rearranged, and several pieces of mail were missing. Not random pieces, specific items. Medical bills from the hospital, bank statements, family photos people mailed to relatives, personal things that would tell you about people's lives, their weaknesses, their schedules. I started locking my truck in the post office garage, but it didn't matter. Whatever this thing was, locks couldn't stop it. More mail disappeared every night. Always personal documents that revealed intimate details about my customers' lives. I tried reporting it to my supervisor, Dale Hutchins. He suggested vandals or meth heads breaking into trucks for drug money. But what kind of junkie steals bank statements and leaves behind cash? The attack started December 15th. I found Bob Carlson first. His front door was wide open, snow drifting across his kitchen floor. Bob was sitting in his recliner, staring at nothing, with 4 deep scratches across his forearm. The cuts were surgical in their precision, deep enough to draw blood, but not deep enough to hit arteries. "Bob?" I shook his shoulder. "What happened?" He blinked slowly, like waking from a dream. "Janet, I was watching TV and then, I can't remember. How long have you been here?" He had no memory of the attack. The scratches looked infected already, turning black around the edges. When I called the volunteer EMT, she said it looked like an unusual animal bite and bandaged him up. Bob insisted he felt fine, just tired. 3 days later, I found Sarah Martinez in the same condition. 4 scratches on her arm, no memory, sitting in a chair staring at nothing. Then David Kim. Then elderly Mrs. Petrov. Always the same pattern, always the 4 scratch mark, always that blank, empty stare. I started researching online, searching for anything similar. That's when I found the old newspaper archives from 1952. The Anchorage Daily News ran a small story buried on page 6. Mail carrier missing, Harold Jennings, 34. Failed to return from his rural delivery route yesterday. His truck was found abandoned at mile marker 47 of the Richardson Highway. Jennings' mail bags were scattered across the snow, contents appearing to have been sorted through by an unknown party. State police report unusual animal tracks around the vehicle, but no signs of struggle. The search continues. Harold Jennings was never found, but I recognized his route description, She ID. It was exactly the same area I'd been serving for 8 years. I dug deeper. Found more incidents going back to the 1920 seconds. Mail carriers disappearing or being found in catatonic states during the polar night, always in the same region. Always with the same 4 scratch marks. The Postal Service always transferred the routes afterward, claiming budget cuts or reorganization. December 20th, I decided to end it. I couldn't let this thing keep hurting people. I'd traced the tracks to their source, an abandoned gold mine 15 miles from my route. The Klondike Mining Company had shut it down in 1924 after 3 miners disappeared during the polar night. Their bodies were never recovered. I went alone. I should have called for backup, but who would believe me? I brought my .38 bear spray and a powerful LED flashlight. The mine entrance was a black hole in the hillside, maybe 7 feet wide. Fresh tracks led in and out. The tunnel went back about 60 feet before opening into a larger chamber. The smell hit me first, something between wet animal and rotting meat. Then I saw what it had been collecting. Mail. Thousands of pieces going back decades, organized in neat stacks around the chamber. Bank statements, medical records, love letters, family photos, all sorted by address, by family name, by the type of personal information they contained. In the center was a collection of trophies, jewelry, photographs, small personal items that belonged to people from my route and others. But the worst part was the wall. Scratched into the stone in that same 4-line pattern were names, addresses, and detailed notes about each household. Medical conditions, work schedules, family relationships, financial situations. It was building a comprehensive profile of every potential victim, using stolen mail to learn their vulnerabilities. I was photographing the evidence when I heard it breathing behind me. I turned and saw it clearly for the first time. The thing was maybe 6 feet long but emaciated, like a skeleton wrapped in pale, translucent skin. It moved on all fours, but its limbs bent wrong at the joints. Where its face should have been were 2 black holes and a gaping mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. Its fingers ended in curved claws about 4 inches long, but the worst part was its eyes. Those black holes weren't empty. There was intelligence there. Ancient, patient, calculating intelligence. It didn't attack immediately. It crouched there, studying me, tilting its head like a curious dog. When it finally moved, it was faster than anything should be. I got off 3 shots before it reached me. The bullets hit but barely slowed it down. The claws raked across my ribs as I dove aside. The pain was incredible, not just physical but something deeper, like it was draining something essential from me. I could feel my strength leaving through the wounds. I stumbled toward the tunnel entrance, firing blindly behind me. The thing followed but slowly, like it was enjoying the chase. I made it to my truck and drove like hell, but I could see it in my mirrors, following at a distance, matching my speed. It stopped at the main road. Wouldn't cross onto the highway, like it had territorial boundaries it couldn't or wouldn't cross. I drove straight to the state trooper station. Detective Chen took my statement and my photographs. The team investigated the mine 2 days later, but they found it empty. Completely empty. The mail, the trophies, even the scratched names on the walls, all gone, like it had never been there. The official report called it a possible bear encounter with wildlife damage to mining site. Case closed. But the attacks stopped. Route 47 was discontinued 3 weeks later, officially for budget reasons. I was transferred to urban delivery in downtown Anchorage. The scratches on my ribs healed, but they left scars that look infected, black lines under my skin that sometimes move on their own. The doctors can't explain it. I feel weaker than I used to, more tired, like something important was taken from me in that mine. Most nights I sleep fine, but sometimes I wake up around midnight and find fresh scratches on my front door. 4 parallel lines gouged into the wood. They could be from anything, neighborhood cats, maybe. But I know what I saw in that mine. That thing has been hunting for decades, maybe longer. It's patient, it learns, it adapts. And postal workers operate in every isolated community in America, following predictable routes to predictable locations. We're perfect, unknowing accomplices for something that wants to study human behavior before it feeds. Last week, I got a call from a mail carrier in northern Maine. She'd found my story online and wanted to compare notes. She's been seeing similar tracks on her rural route, similar scratches on mailboxes, similar pieces of missing mail. I told her to quit, transfer to urban delivery, get as far from isolated routes as possible, but I don't think distance matters. I've been in downtown Anchorage for 3 months now, and last night I found something in my personal mailbox that made my blood freeze. A bank statement from 1952. Harold Jennings' bank statement, the mail carrier who disappeared. Somehow, it found me in the city. It's been watching, learning my new routine, building a new profile. The polar night ends in 12 days. The sun will rise again, and maybe that thing will retreat back to whatever hole it crawled out of. But next winter, when the darkness returns, it'll be ready. It'll have spent months studying its next hunting ground, learning new patterns, finding new mail carriers to follow. I'm putting in for early retirement. Moving to Florida, where there's no polar night, no deep wilderness, no isolated routes. But sometimes I wonder if it matters. That thing has had decades to spread, to adapt, to find new hunting grounds. How many other mail carriers have disappeared over the years? How many isolated communities have learned to board their windows during the darkest months? How many postal routes have been quietly discontinued after workers started reporting strange incidents? The mail must go through. That's the Postal Service motto. But sometimes I think we've been delivering more than letters and packages. Sometimes we've been delivering information to something ancient and hungry, something that sees human civilization not as a threat but as a convenient filing system. If you're reading this and you work a rural mail route, especially in Alaska during the polar night, pay attention. Check your vehicle every morning. Look for missing mail, rearranged bags, scratches on the exterior. And if you start seeing 4-line claw marks on mailboxes, If residents start boarding their windows and talking about things prowling at night, request a transfer immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to investigate. Don't think you can handle it alone. Because the thing in the mine wasn't just some random monster. It was organized, intelligent, strategic. It had been building a systematic catalog of human vulnerability for decades, using our own postal system against us. And I don't think it was the only one.